The first sign something was wrong wasn't the letter. It was the laughter. Saturday morning, 6:12 a.m. I stepped onto my porch with a mug of burnt coffee and saw 3 strangers standing at the edge of my pond. Folding chairs. Fishing rods. One of them already barefoot in the water like he owned it. My pond. 40 years old. Dug by my father in 1984. Fed by a natural spring that runs underneath my land before draining into a protected creek 2 miles downstream. I didn't yell. I didn't threaten. I just stood there and watched. Because people who trespass that confidently usually believe they're legally untouchable. And that belief is always expensive. The HOA letter arrived 2 hours later. Certified mail. Thick envelope. Glossy logo. Willow Ridge Estates Homeowners Association. Subject line, Notice of Community Resource Reclassification. That was the first lie. They claimed my pond was now designated a shared recreational water feature for the subdivision. No purchase. No easement. No consent. Just a vote. According to the letter, the HOA board had unanimously approved the designation based on historical water usage and community benefit. Translation: we decided we want it. They cited a 1979 watershed reference and some vague language about natural drainage. No signatures. No survey. No state filings. Just confidence. That's how HOAs operate when they think you don't know the law. My name is Daniel Mercer. 3rd-generation landowner. I inherited 62 acres outside Austin after my mother passed. I don't farm full-time. I don't ranch. I work in civil hydrology consulting. I design water compliance plans for municipalities. Which means I know water law. I know environmental liability. And I know exactly how fast ignorance turns into lawsuits. Willow Ridge didn't know that. They just saw an old man on land with a pond and assumed community access would be easy. They were wrong. By Monday, the pond had a temporary dock, 2 no private property signs, and an HOA-funded kayak rack. They didn't ask. They didn't notify. They didn't file permits. They just acted. That's when I called the HOA office. The president answered on the 3rd ring. Her name was Lydia Hargreave. Former real estate broker. Moved from California. Elected HOA president twice. Her voice had that practiced calm people use when they think rules only apply downward. She told me, and I quote, "The water was always meant to be shared. You don't own nature." That sentence ended her career. Here's the part most people don't understand. You can own water. Not all of it. Not everywhere. But in Texas, spring-fed surface water entirely contained on private land, with no navigable connection, can be privately controlled. My pond wasn't runoff. It wasn't floodwater. It wasn't a shared watershed. It was spring-fed, documented, permitted, and registered in 1991. I didn't just own the land. I owned the water rights. And when you violate water rights, that's not HOA drama. That's state-level environmental law. I didn't send a cease and desist. I didn't remove the dock. I let them install paddleboard storage, picnic benches, a floating rope divider. I let residents swim. Because every improvement they made without permits increased their liability. Every nail. Every screw. Every child in that water. They were building their own case. 3 weeks later, a teenager slipped off the dock. Dislocated shoulder. Ambulance called. The HOA filed an incident report listing the pond as community-maintained recreational water. That document mattered more than any argument. Because now, on paper, the HOA had assumed responsibility for water quality, safety compliance, environmental discharge. They had no testing, no permits, no insurance coverage. That's when I made my move. I called the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality. I didn't complain. I asked questions. Specifically, who was responsible for water testing on a newly designated recreational body? What permits were required for public access? What happens if water flows into a protected creek? The answers were calm, methodical, and catastrophic for Willow Ridge. TCEQ inspectors arrived unannounced. They tested E. coli, nitrates, phosphates. Not because my water was dirty, but because HOA landscaping upstream was. Their fertilizers were washing into my pond, which now, legally, they had claimed control over. The results were immediate. Unsafe levels. Documented contamination. Clear source attribution. And now the HOA had a problem they couldn't vote away. The first fine was $47,000. For unpermitted public water access. Then came daily non-compliance penalties. Mandatory remediation orders. Legal exposure for the injured minor. Insurance refused coverage. Why? Because the HOA never disclosed the reclassification to their carrier. That omission voided their policy. They called an emergency HOA meeting. Residents were furious. Lydia stood at the podium blaming me. Said I withheld information. Said I trapped the HOA. I stood up. I brought my water rights filings. TCEQ notices. Their own incident report. I said one sentence. You declared ownership of something you didn't understand. Silence. That was the moment they realized this wasn't fixable. Parents of the injured teen sued. Not me. The HOA. Because the HOA claimed control. They settled for $310,000. Special assessment followed. $4,800 per household. Residents revolted. Lydia resigned 2 days later. I reclaimed the pond. Filed a formal notice with the county. Posted legal signage. Removed the dock, legally, with documentation. Then I did one more thing. I donated a conservation easement. Which permanently barred public access. Recreational designation. Future HOA claims. Forever. The HOA can never touch it again. Willow Ridge still exists. But 3 board members were removed. Insurance premiums doubled. HOA bylaws were rewritten. All because they thought a vote could override ownership. It can't. And it never will. People think HOAs win by intimidation. They don't. They win by targeting people who don't know the rules. They picked the wrong pond. They picked the wrong land. And they learned, permanently, that water remembers who owns it.